Hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, and writer. It is Sunday, June 9th, 2019, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well today. Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. We have a lot to talk about. So I saw articles dealing with this topic going back to March of 2019, an article by history.com, which is the official website of the History Channel. And then I saw one by the New York Times, actually going back to February 2016, first from the New York Times. Read the New York Times every day, then one from the following month from history.com, official website of the History Channel. I get their emails on a daily basis. And then also one from AtlantaBlackStar.com. Okay, so I wanted to talk about this. New research from an African-American female professor shows that white women made up about 40% of slave owners, about 40% of slave owners. And this is research coming from Professor Stephanie E. Jones-Rogers, who's an associate professor of history at the University of California, Berkeley. And she looked at census data from 1850 to 1860. Now, we know that when we deal with the history of slavery, which lasted basically 246 years in the British colonies, what then becomes the United States, we have different nuances as we go from the 1700s to the 1800s, 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s. So she specifically looked at Census Bureau data from 1850 to 1860. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about. So everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in. Also, this is a real history lesson. I will also do a preview of the online course that we have starting up on June 12th, Wednesday, June 12th. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This would be a 8-week, 16-hour online course that meets once a week. And we'll deal with thousands of years of history. And this will be live. This will be the first time I've done this course live in 2 years. All right, so let's look at the in African-American business owners, post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. Also, we'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network also, okay? All right, so let's look at the article from AtlantaBlackStar.com. AtlantaBlackStar.com has a really good article dealing with this topic. Research by Black female professor reveals startling truth that white women made up 40% of slave owners. Okay, research by Black female professor reveals startling truth that white women made up 40% of slave owners. Okay, and this article is from May 25th, 2019. So it's just a few weeks ago, May 25th, 2019. All right, so in this article, it talks about how a set of data uncovered by University of California, Berkeley professor reveals Southern white women played a heavier role in the enslavement of Africans than previously thought. Professor Stephanie E. Jones-Rogers, an associate professor of history at the university, combed through data from the 1850 and 1860 census and revealed that white women made up around 40% of slave owners, okay? So she has a new book that came out in February 2019, just in time for African American History Month. And the name of her book is They Were Her Property. They Were Her Property, White Women as Slave Owners in the American South. White women as slave owners in the American South, okay? So let me say from the outset that this is because of changes in social media platforms and because of new policies dealing with hate speech, and this is going to be on different social media platforms, this broadcast and the podcast, and it's going to be on 8 different podcast platforms. And because of certain backlash and attacks that have happened to me recently, let me say this from the outset. This is not hate speech. This is not about hating anybody. This is about understanding history and correcting the historical record. There's overwhelming evidence to document what we're talking about, okay? And we're not talking about hating anybody. And, you know, I teach this history, and also I'm an advocate of the history of African Americans being taught in school and the correct history of slavery being taught in school. And you hear me oftentimes talk about this study from the Southern Poverty Law Center called Teaching Hard History American Slavery. Teaching Hard History American Slavery. This is a 52-page study from the Southern Poverty Law Center. You can download it. Go to splcenter.org, splcenter.org, and it documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in American schools, not just schools that have predominantly African-American student body, but American schools, period, okay? It documents how the history is being incorrectly taught, the negative side effects from the history of slavery being incorrectly taught, and it gives tips and teaches how to more correctly teach the history of slavery. Okay, so I want people to understand that some of the information I say may go outside the circumference of some people's awareness. Just because you don't like it or disagree with it or never heard it before does not mean that it's not true. It just means you have to do some research to understand what it is that I'm talking about. All right, so let me say that from the start. Okay, so let's continue here. How's everybody doing? Toya and Daniel, Shirley, Anthony, just a few of the people watching. Okay, we'll post a link here also. You can register for the online course that I have starting up Wednesday, June 12th. And we'll do it live, and then it's archived after that. You can go back and watch it over and over again. We just posted the link. Also, it's at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. The name of the online course is Ancient Kemet, the Moor, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, where they didn't teach in the school 2019 edition. All right, let's continue here. All right, so the findings helped Professor Stephanie E. Jones compile her book entitled They Were Her Property, White Women as Slave Owners in the American South. Now, on her department page at the University of California, Berkeley, Professor Stephanie Jones Rogers describes the February 2019 release of her book as, quote, a regional study that draws upon formerly enslaved people's testimony to dramatically reshape current understandings of white women's economic relationships to slavery, end quote. One of the things that her book did, the research of her book, one of the things that it did, and it ties into this 52-page study, Teaching Hard History of American Slavery, is that in addition to looking at census data, and in addition to looking at documents and letters, things like this, what are routinely looked at, she also looked at slave narratives or narratives of former slaves, okay? She looked at interviews done with former slaves in the 1930s from the WPA, Works Progress Administration, okay? And this was part of the New Deal, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 1930s. And it was a specific department there called the Federal Writers Project. Okay, Works Progress Administration, WPA, of the 1930s. And this was part of the Federal Writers Project of the WPA. And one thing that they did was they interviewed former slaves and documented this, okay? If we look at this document, Teaching Hard History of American Slavery, on page, 16, I think it is, page 10. On page 10, they show you this picture of this African-American woman who's a former slave, okay? I downloaded the study, took it to the printer, got it printed up, because this is what I do with a lot of studies. I do a lot of research, so I get the studies and get them printed up. But on page 10 of this study, it talks about how in the 1930s and 40s, the Works Progress Administration and Farm Security Administration photographed the daily lives of thousands of formerly enslaved people, tenant farmers, and sharecroppers. This photograph of a woman born in enslavement was taken in Greensboro, Alabama in 1941. Okay, so this is what we see here. This is from page 10 of this study that you can download as soon as you finish watching this broadcast, and we'll give you the link. We'll post a link here also. This is from Teaching Hard History, American Slavery from the Southern Poverty Law Center. So one thing that she did that went beyond a lot of other research is that she looked at firsthand accounts about slavery from formerly enslaved African people. Okay, so in her book, Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers explained that white women's involvement in slavery comes from family as their slave-owning parents, quote, typically gave their daughters more enslaved people than land, end quote, okay? Slave-owning parents typically gave their daughters more enslaved people than land. Now, she said, quote, what this means is that their very identities as white Southern women are tied to the actual or the possible ownership of people. She said in an interview with History.com, was the official website of the History Channel. History.com has an article dealing with this from March 12, 2019. So this was probably the second article I saw on this topic. The first one I saw was from February 2019 by the New York Times. The second one was from History.com. I get their emails on a daily basis, then with This Day in History, and then also Inside History or History in the Headlines. I get that email as well. This article from History.com is entitled The Massive Overlooked Role of Female Slave Owners. The Massive Overlooked Role of Female Slave Owners. Okay, now I kind of find it interesting that they didn't say white female slave owners, okay, in the title, but it's all right. I know what you mean. It's okay. When I look at the article from the New York Times, that article is entitled, it's a review of her book. That article is entitled White Women Were Avid Slave Owners, a New Book Shows. White Women Were Avid Slave Owners, a New Book Shows. So the article from History.com, I'm glad they wrote it. It's the History.com, once again, is the official website of the History Channel. But I just find it interesting in the title, they didn't say the overlooked role of white female slave owners, but it's all right. You got the information out there. I guess that's the most important thing, okay? And once again, this is not an attack on white women or anything like this. You know, when I teach this history, I try to be very fair in the history. You had white people who were abolitionists who risked their lives to free enslaved Africans. That is true. That's a true part of the history. White men and white women. You had some that were abolitionists. You had even more who were slave owners. And it's also important to understand that about at least this time in history that she's looking at, 1850, 1860, around this time, 75% of white people don't own slaves. So basically 25% of white people are the slave owners. That's true also. Okay. So when I do these types of presentations and these broadcasts, my lectures, my show, so people understand, maybe some people, this type of information is new to them. This is not a wholesale indictment of white people. This is not an attack on them. This is dealing with the history and correcting the historical record. This is what this is about. All right. Sandra, how you doing? Tommy as well. Okay. How's everybody doing? And then also, you know, I understand, and I've had people, parents who have biracial children who've approached me about getting information to teach their children. I understand that can be complex as well. Okay. If you are a white parent that has a biracial child, or an African-American parent that has a biracial child, how do we teach this history? Right. And at the same time, you don't want that biracial child to feel a certain way about their white parent. Right. That's that's something that I personally don't have to deal with, but I'm sensitive to other people who have to navigate that. I have them reach out to me for resources as well. OK. Toya said, we're not apologizing for our history. No, we're not apologizing for our history. But when I deal with this type of information, and especially because of certain changes in social media platforms based upon hate speech and certain things that have happened to me recently that I'm not going to go into, I have to frame this in a certain way. Okay, let's continue here. All right, so her book also notes that owning enslaved Africans served as white women's primary source of wealth, plus owning a large number of enslaved people reportedly made women better marriage material. All right. And this dealt with the accumulated wealth that some white women had who were slave owners. This made them a better catch. This made them a more suitable mate for a white man. All right. Now, once wed, okay, once she was married, white women were said to have fought and frequently won the right to continue to have ownership over their enslaved Africans, not handing over ownership to their husbands, right? Professor Jones Rogers says, quote, for them, slavery was their freedom, end quote. For them, slavery was their freedom. One example she gives is somebody who we know, who we've heard at least about, some of us know more about it than others, is Martha Washington, George Washington's wife. Martha Washington was a slave owner when they got married, and she owned more slaves than George Washington did. So after Martha Washington married President George Washington in Virginia in 1759, George Washington is said to have possibly owned around 18 people. Now, he became a slave owner at about 10 or 11 years old. He inherited some slaves from his father, all right? But his wife, one of the richest women in the state of Virginia, owned 84 enslaved Africans and dramatically increased the local slave population. So when they married, she owned 84 enslaved Africans. So she inherited basically her slaves, okay? And there was a story, there was a case about one of George Washington's runaway slaves. Her name was Ona Judge. I've talked about her in the past. AtlantaBlackStar.com and other sources have articles about Ona Judge, ONAJUDGE. And there's a good book called Never Caught, written by an African-American female historian who I met and talked to, and I can't remember her name. I'll pick it up. It wasn't Dr. Raina, Armstrong, Dr. Erica Armstrong Dunbar. That's who it is. Because I met the sister. She spoke at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African-American History. And I met the sister. I talked to her. We had a really good conversation. And I told her I was familiar with her work. And she also, let's see here. I'm going to try to pull up the article. That's a fascinating history dealing with Ona Judge. Ona Judge was the personal attendant to personal slave of Martha Washington. Ona Judge found out that Martha was going to give her away as a wedding gift to Martha Washington's niece or something like that, female relative, niece or something like that. So Ona Judge found out about this and she ran away. She goes up north. She runs away, and George Washington sent slave catchers after her a number of times, but she was never caught. This is where the title of the story, the title of the book comes from, Never Caught. All right. So, when oftentimes we talk about George Washington, we talk about the American Revolutionary War. We talk about him being one of the founding fathers, but his involvement in slavery and the enslavement of African people and the dehumanization of African people is oftentimes not talked about. Okay. So when we deal with this, history, it's a nuanced, complex history. He was, Dr. John Henrik Clarke probably put it the best. One of our great Grandmaster Scholar Warriors, Dr. Clarke said, don't take George Washington out of the history, leave him in there, but you have to put Washington in the proper historical context, okay? The proper historical context. So the name of the book is called Never Caught, The Washingtons' Relentless Pursuit of Their Runaway Slave Ona Judge. Never Caught, The Washingtons' Relentless Pursuit of Their Runaway Slave Ona Judge by Dr. Erica Armstrong Dunbar. Okay, and This article right here is from AtlantaBlackStar.com. I think that's when I first found out about her. This article is from February 11th, 2017. And let me see, it was either there. Now, Roland Martin also interviewed her on TV One when he had a show on TV One, News One Now. So I saw her there. And she also, let me see, if the Nat Turner movie came out in 2016, I first found out about her in the book that Nate Parker put out. That was a companion to the Nat Turner movie, Birth of a Nation. He put out a book about that also. So I have the book somewhere here with all these books here. And that sister wrote co-wrote a chapter in the book that deals with the history of the Nat Turner Rebellion. So let me see if I have the book here, because I have about 4 stacks of books here. So hold on, let me see. Just give me a second here, see if I can pull it out. This looks like Jenga. This is like African-centered Jenga or something. I'm trying to pull out the book that's towards the bottom of the stack without the whole stack falling. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, here we go. All right, here we go. So this book right here, if you saw the Nate Parker movie, Birth of a Nation, about the Nat Turner Rebellion, so I got this October of 2016. So I probably first found out about her possibly from this book, because she co-wrote, Dr. Erica Armstrong Dunbar, she co-wrote the chapter in here dealing with history. And it gives a lot of background historical information about the Nat Turner Rebellion. That's probably hard to find. So the chapter she co-wrote it with another fantastic African-American female historian named Dr. Danny Ramey Berry. And okay. The chapter they wrote is called A History of Resistance, the Unbroken Chain of Enslaved African Resistance and Rebellion. A History of Resistance, the Unbroken Chain of Enslaved African Resistance and Rebellion. So if you get this book, or if you have it, it starts on page 35, okay? And they deal with a lot of the background history. And history I didn't know about the Nat Turner Rebellion. So when I did my lecture dealing with the history of the Nat Turner Rebellion of 1831, when the movie came out, there was some historical inaccuracies in the movie. The real history is different. So this was one of my sources for my lecture, dealing with the real history of the Nat Turner Rebellion and separating the movie, separating what we saw in the movie from the actual history. Okay, the name of this book is called The Birth of a Nation, Nat Turner and the Making of a Movement, edited by Nate Parker, the official movie tie-in. Okay, that's the name of this book. A lot of people don't even know this book exists. They went to go see the movie, don't even know this book exists. Okay, The Birth of a Nation, Nat Turner and the Making of a Movement, edited by Nate Parker, the official movie tie-in. So this is a crucial book. If you saw the movie, this is a crucial book. It also deals with behind the scenes, and it deals with the history of the making of the movie and what Nate Parker had to go through to get that movie made also. All right, so let's continue here. How's everybody doing? All right, and then we'll post a link here for the online course that starts up, that I'm teaching, that starts up Wednesday, June 9th. It's an 8-week, 16-hour online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, 2019 edition. We're going to deal with thousands of years of history. It's going to be deep. All right, so let's go back to the article from AtlantaBlackStar.com. Research by Black female professor reveals startling truth that white women made up 40% of slave owners. All right. So we were talking about Martha Washington, and we started talking about Ona Judge. All right. Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers argues that white women were trained to be engaged in the slavery industry at a young age. She said, quote, their exposure to the slave market is not something that begins in adulthood. It begins in their homes when they're little girls, sometimes infants, when they're given enslaved people as gifts. And this happened. Okay. And when we look at Nat Turner had 3 owners in his lifetime. Now he died, he was executed November 11th, 1831. Okay. He was 31 years old. One of his slave owners was it was about 10 years old. It was a white boy about 10 years old who basically inherited Nat Turner. Okay. So you see this taking place in history. All right. So Professor Jones Rogers demonstrates that in her book. She demonstrates that in her book by including interviews with formerly enslaved people conducted in the 1930s through the New Deal Agency Works Progress Administration. All right. The WPA, Works Progress Administration. And that was the Federal Writers Project, which was like a department in the Works Progress Administration. One formerly enslaved said children would ruthlessly beat enslaved people. She said, quote, it didn't matter the child was large or small. They always beat you till the blood ran down. Or they always beat you till the blood ran down, she said. And let me see. I saw that quote. If we look at the article from history.com, they have that quote in here as well. It didn't matter whether the child was large or small. One woman told the WPA, they always beat you till the blood ran down. I think they went deeper into this in the article from the New York Times. Okay. On page 2 of the article from the New York Times entitled White Women Were Avid Slave Owners, a New Book Shows, from February 26, 2019, written by Parul Sehgal, Sehgal. On page 2 of this article, it says, from these stories, Jones Rogers, let me see, we have it here. I have it pulled up here on the screen also. So let's scroll down to this. From these stories, Jones Rogers brings an unseen world to life of white women's instruction in domination, a process of grooming that began in infancy. WPA interviewees, Works Progress Administration interviewees, recount threats, abuse, and whippings administered by white children. Quote, it didn't matter whether the child was large or small, one woman said. They always beat you till the blood ran down. And this also ties into, now at the same time, at this point, I understand that all white people at this point in time did not own slaves. That is true. Okay. But when we talk about racism being a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, because racism has nothing to do with not liking people, calling people racial epithets, things like this, right? And if you read Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy, she talks about this as well. If you read Powernomics by Dr. Claude Anderson, one of my teachers, or his first book, Black Labor, White Wealth, he deals with this as well. If you read some of my articles that I've written, I talk about this and deal with this in my lectures. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. Racism comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy, and this is designed to preserve white survival. Okay, this is a system. Racism occurs when one race of people control the majority of the wealth, power, and resources, benefits, privileges, land, access to education, access to opportunity, and they use this to marginalize, subordinate, and do harm to another race of people. Okay, now I'm not saying all white people are white supremacists, that all white people subscribe to this ideology, but we see it throughout history for the last 500 years. And what happens is when we talk about what was one of the most important things to understand about this is when we talk about racism being a system of advantage and privilege, then we have to ask ourselves, what is a system? Okay, a system is not a computer program. All right. When we talk about the system, right, we talk about the system's holding us down. A system is a group of people who have been indoctrinated with a certain ideology, and they work to keep that ideology, they work to uphold that ideology and enforce that ideology. That's what a system is. When we talk about racism being a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon a race, then what are we actually talking about is the system. We're talking about a group of people who have been indoctrinated by a smaller group of people. We can call it the 1% or the 10%. They've been indoctrinated with a certain ideology, been convinced of it, and they work to uphold that ideology and keep it in place. Okay, so this is what we have to understand. And you know, I do a lot of research. I travel across the country. I do lectures. I read African American sources, white sources, things like this. Americans are woefully ignorant about history. African Americans and white Americans are woefully ignorant about history. The reason why is because there has been a concerted effort not to teach the correct history in our schools. So then those people who graduate from schools, American schools, if they don't get the correct history, they grow up to be adults who have children who are ignorant of history. So for instance, if we look at this study from the Southern Poverty Law Center, all this ties in together. And this is one of, now when I did the last time I did the online course, it was in September 2017. This study didn't exist because this study was first introduced in, was released basically February 2018 for African American History. So this didn't even exist. But one of the things this study did, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery from the Southern Poverty Law Center. One of the things it did was it did a survey of 1,000 high school seniors, 12th graders, 1,000 12th graders from across the country. And it asked them different questions about what they knew about the history of slavery based upon what they, were taught in school. It found that only 8% of high school seniors surveyed out of 1,000 could identify slavery as the central cause of the Civil War. Now, these are children in 12th grade. They're learning American history, American government. Some of them may have taken an African American history class, okay? Because I know at Cass Technical High School, after I graduated in '89, so after I left, I know sometime after that, they instituted African American history class. I didn't have it when I was there, but I know some schools, Philadelphia, in the city of Philadelphia, I know it's mandatory in high school that students have to take at least one semester of African American history, an African American history class, right? So when you have a study like this and 1,000 out of 1,000 12th graders, only 8% know that slavery was the central reason why the Civil War was fought. Well, that's a huge problem. One, that means they didn't learn it in school. Okay. Two, it means their parents didn't teach. So when we talk about teaching the accurate history of America, of slavery, right? Not only are students ignorant of this history largely, the teachers are largely ignorant of this history. This is why one of these studies, this is why a study like this is so important, okay? And this is why I talk about in a lot of my lectures and I use it to teach from. Because when we have debates over Confederate monuments and Confederate monuments being taken down, and you have an ignorant president who advocates for the Confederate monuments to be preserved. Well, this comes out of an ignorance of history because other countries don't honor their traitors. Other countries don't honor people who committed treason. So you have Donald Trump loosely throwing around the term treason, and he's proven he doesn't understand the U.S. Constitution because treason is defined in the U.S. Constitution in Article 3, Section 3. I mean, this is one of the dumbest ass people I've ever seen in my life. Seriously, this is one of the dumbest ass people I've ever seen in my life. When you look at President Obama had to be a super intellectual. I mean, he had to go above and beyond just to prove he was half as good. So you had Donald Trump demanding that President Obama not just present his birth certificate, but also present his high school, his college transcripts, because Trump didn't think that an African-American man could get exceptional grades. Yet Trump used Michael Cohen, and this is reported. Michael Cohen talked about this, his former attorney who's in prison right now. And Michael Cohen's in prison trying to figure out why Donald Trump's not in prison. And Michael Cohen is doing what Trump told him to do. It came out in Michael Cohen's testimony in front of the House Oversight Committee. I think it was a House Oversight Committee. Representative Elijah Cummings chairs that. Donald Trump used Cohen to intimidate Donald Trump's old high school to get them to suppress his high school transcripts of his grades, while he's demanding the college transcripts of President Obama. So you have Trump, who is advocating for the preservation of Confederate monuments. But when you understand the Confederacy, and this ties into the history of Juneteenth. I just talked to Bob Johnson today, who's the organizer of the huge 3-day Juneteenth festival and parade in Atlanta. So I'm headed to Atlanta in a few days because I'm speaking there. It's June 14th, Friday, June 14th through Sunday, June 16th. I'm speaking there, and I'll be a vendor also. All right. We have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And also, if you'd like to donate to the African History Network, that helps, because that helps cover expenses traveling there and traveling back. Okay, paypal.me/TheAHNShow, paypal.me/TheAHNShow, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We just post the information. But when we look at the Confederate monuments, these were erected basically after the Civil War ends. Civil War is 1861, 1865. All this history ties into Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, when General Gordon Granger goes into Galveston, Texas, and delivers General Order Number 3, which frees the 250,000 enslaved Africans there in Galveston. Okay. And it was 250,000 in Texas. I'm not exactly sure if it was 250,000 specifically in Galveston, Texas. But this is 2 weeks after the Civil War ended. Civil War officially ended June 2nd, 1865. Now, some people mistakenly tie this to the Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st, 1863. And this is something that I'll explain when I speak at the festival. The Emancipation Proclamation did not free the enslaved Africans, so we shouldn't tie that to the Emancipation Proclamation. That's a misunderstanding of history. That was issued January 1st, 1863, after the Battle of Antietam, issued by President Abraham Lincoln. It was a military strategy. It was the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation was delivered September 22nd, 1862. This was designed to bring the South back into the Union. It was a threat to the South that if you do not come back into the Union, we're going to free your enslaved Africans. They designated those enslaved Africans as contraband. They were trying to rob the South of their enslaved Africans because they knew that the wealth of the South was tied to the enslaved Africans. So this was a military strategy. The goal of the Civil War was not to free the enslaved Africans. The goal of the Civil War was to bring the South back into the Union, because the first state to secede from the Union was South Carolina, December 20th, 1860. About 6 weeks after Abraham Lincoln became president-elect. He became president-elect November 6th, 1860. Okay. He was the candidate of the Republican Party. The Republican Party was the party basically of abolitionists. They were formed in 1854 by groups of abolitionists to be the counter to the Democratic Party. When he becomes president-elect, you have these southern states who fear that he's going to free the slaves. In his March 4th, 1861 inaugural address, This is after 7 states had seceded from the Union. You had South Carolina, December 20th, 1860. You had 6 more states by February of 1861. He delivers his inaugural address March 4th, 1861, to try to appease the southern states to keep more of them from seceding to the Union. He, in his inaugural address, he talks about how he had no plans to end slavery in states where slavery already existed. Okay, now this is before the Civil War starts. Civil War is going to start April 12th, 1861, the following month. But you have these southern states seceding from the Union because they fear that Lincoln is going to free the slaves. And he's trying to tell them, no. He said, no, you slave-holding states, I'm not going to end slavery in those states. It's all right for you to keep those slaves. This is what he's trying to tell them. Okay, but then the Civil War starts with the attack on Fort Sumter in South Carolina, April 12, 1861. After that, all hell breaks loose. You're going to have more states that secede. But they committed treason against the United States, declared war on the U.S. They committed treason based upon Article 3, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution. President Andrew Johnson, who succeeds Lincoln when Lincoln's assassinated, shot April 14th, at the Ford Theater, 1865. He dies the next morning. After the Civil War, Johnson is going to give a blanket pardon to all the rebels, to the Confederates, because he was sympathetic to the Confederacy. Okay? So, but they committed treason against this country. Countries don't honor those who commit treason against them. Countries don't erect statues to those who commit treason against them. So all these Confederate statues that still exist, and you got about 12 or 14 in the U.S. Capitol building as well, they're honoring traitors to this country. This is why all the Confederate monuments, even now people argue is part of history. Okay, that's true. It is part of history. It's part of the lowest history in this country. Now, I'm against Confederate monuments being destroyed. And I've done an entire lecture dealing with the history of Confederate monuments, the history of the Confederate flags, things like this. Because what people think is the Confederate flag, the flag that was on the Dukes of Hazzard car. And what was the name of that car? It was called the General Lee. And the car is named after General Robert E. Lee, who was a traitor to this country, who picked up arms and fought against the Union to preserve slavery in Virginia. Okay, that's who the car on the TV show The Dukes of Hazzard is named after. It's named after somebody who committed treason. He was also a brutal slave owner, by the way. Okay, there's an article from, I think it's TheAHNTic.com, TheAHNTic.com called the Myth of the Kindly General Lee. All right, but what a lot of people don't know is that General Lee was against Confederate monuments. After the Civil War was over with, he was against using he was against having Confederate monuments. He was against using any of the Confederate flags also, as well. Yeah, TheAHNTic.com. All right, I wanted to make sure because I read so many articles. June 4th, 2017, June 4th, 2017, the myth of the kindly General Lee, the legend of the Confederate leader's heroism and decency is based in the fiction of a person who never existed. This is a deep article here. All right. And you can tell Trump never read this article. Trump talked about Lee being a brilliant general and all stuff like this. Dude, you got a sitting president. Some people call him a fake president. I'm one of them. I call him the first Russian president of the United States. If you read the Mueller report, you know what I'm talking about. Volume 1 of the Mueller report. If you read the Mueller report, you know what I'm talking about. You know this ain't fake news. You know I'm telling the truth. He's the first Russian president of the United States. But Trump just recently was praising General Robert E. Lee. You have a sitting president praising someone who committed treason against this country? The myth of Lee goes something like this. He was a brilliant strategist and devoted Christian man who abhorred slavery and labored tirelessly after the war to bring the country back together. There is little truth in this. General Robert E. Lee was a devout Christian, and historians regard him as an accomplished tactician But despite his ability to win individual battles, his decision to fight a conventional war against the more densely populated and industrialized North is considered by many historians to have been a fatal strategic error. But even if one conceded Lee's military prowess, he would still be responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans in defense of the South's authority to own millions of human beings as property because they are Black. General Robert E. Lee's elevation is a key part of a 150-year-old propaganda campaign designed to erase slavery as the cause of the Civil War and whitewash the Confederate cause as a noble one. This is called this whole lost cause propaganda campaign that was pushed by the South. This is a 150-year-old propaganda campaign. Now that ideology is known as the lost cause. And as historian David Blight writes, it provided a, quote, foundation on which Southerners built the Jim Crow system, end quote. This is deep history. Now, this is who Trump was just praising a few months ago. See, this is why, once again, I have to go back to this study, because the reason why is because I've actually read it. This is why this is so important. This is why this study should be used by every school in this country. Okay? And one of the things they tell teachers don't do is don't do slave reenactments. Don't do mock slave auctions. Like you've seen some of my broadcasts where I talk about recently mock slave auctions that happened in Bronxville, New York. And we constantly see stories in schools of slave lessons gone wrong. They tell you in here, don't do that. They talk about how it traumatizes students, especially African-American students. Don't do mock Civil War enactments. Don't do slave auction reenactments. Don't have simulations of Black children picking cotton. Don't do none of that. They tell you this in here. And this is put together by a committee of historians, a committee of educators. Okay? So check out this article here from, this is a deep, deep article from TheAHNShow.com. I guarantee you Donald Trump has not read it. The myth of the kindly General Lee, the legend of the Confederate leader's heroism and decency is based in the fiction of a person who never existed. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that General Lee was against Confederate monuments. After the Civil War ended, there were numerous times when he was asked to attend the unveiling of a Confederate monument in his honor, a monument of him, a monument dedicated to him. He always declined. He felt that after the Civil War ended, he felt that there needed to be a period of time for a healing to take place between the South and the North. The South was largely destroyed. I mean, there's still tensions, there's still hatred that the South has for the North. You had these Yankees that came through and wiped out their way of life, freed their 4 million, basically, it was about 3 million in the South. Freed their enslaved Africans, wiped out their wealth, okay? So there was intense hatred still between the South and the North. So he felt there needed to be a period of time of healing. He was totally against Confederate monuments. He was against any of the Confederate flags. The flag that was on the General Lee car from the Dukes of Hazzard, that's not the Confederate flag. That's the Confederate battle flag of Northern Virginia under General Robert E. Lee's army. There were 3 flags that flew over the Confederate States of America from 1861 to 1865. That flag was never one of them. So when you see the white supremacists out with what they think is the Confederate flag, just by what they do, they show you how ignorant they are. So August of 2017, when you had the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, and that's when Heather Heyer, the white female activist, Heather Heyer, the anti-racist activist, she was killed. Okay, you had 12 white supremacist organizations that organized this Unite the Right rally. And they used the cover of preserving this statue of Robert E. Lee. They used that as a cover to organize, to have this rally. Now, Vice.com was there on the ground interviewing people, and they were like, dude, these people ain't talking about preserving this statue. That's not what they're talking about. Okay, Vice News, Vice.com. But when you study Robert E. Lee, he was against Confederate monuments, even the ones dedicated to him. So when you actually study this history, it shows you how ignorant a lot of these white supremacist organizations are. You are here organizing a rally to preserve a statue dedicated to a man who didn't want a statue. And then you're running around here waving this flag that you say is the Confederate flag, but it's not the Confederate flag. It's the Confederate battle flag of Northern Virginia under General Robert E. Lee's army. So when you listen to them, you see how ignorant a lot of them are, because they have a poor understanding of history. But we have to understand they have been purposely miseducated. White people have been purposely miseducated in this country, in the school system. I know there are a lot of dedicated teachers. I'm not attacking the teachers. I'm dealing with the curriculum. I know there are a lot of dedicated teachers working 2 and 3 jobs. I come from a long line of teachers. I know teachers across the country are taking money out of their pockets to buy school supplies that the school is not offering them, even though you have certain people saying, oh, we should let the teachers carry guns. Okay? But they don't want to give them proper school supplies. They don't want to pay the teachers properly. I understand that. My mother taught for decades here in Detroit. I went through numerous teacher strikes. So I understand this. So I'm not attacking the teachers. I'm talking about the curriculum. Okay? So I know you have a lot of dedicated teachers of all races and all ethnic groups. But this is why something like this is so important, and it's free. This is why I don't understand why schools aren't using this. I know about it. My degree is not in education. How the hell I know about this and they don't? So those who have children in the school systems, public school systems, take this to your teachers, take this to the school board meeting, take this to the parent-teacher conference meeting, and say they need to implement this. Okay? Teaching Hard History, American Slavery from the Southern Poverty Law Center. We'll post a link here for you so you can download it. Let me pull this up. Teaching Hard History. Okay, African American business owners also post the name of your business here on the thread of the broadcast. We'll let you know how you can advertise with the African History Network. Email us at customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. Customerservice@africanhistorynetwork.com. Our current promotion, get 2 months for the price of 1. We have a new advertiser. We know that summertime is coming up. People want to get into shape, and the Fast Life 28-day challenge can definitely help you with this. Now, this is a 28-day challenge that deals with a fasting program. It's an online coaching program to help members tap into their body's natural ability to repair itself through fasting. Okay, in this challenge, they focus on utilizing fasting, whole foods, and movement to improve metabolic conditions such as obesity, high blood pressure, pre-diabetes, high cholesterol, fatty liver, and much more. They have a new group starting up very soon. Visit their website, tfl28.com, tfl28.com, for more information about the Fast Life 28-day challenge. They can definitely help you live a healthier lifestyle and get in shape for the summer as well. Okay, the Fast Life 28-day challenge. All right, so let's continue here. Post this here. All right, let's continue. Okay, so let's go back to the article for, let me see, did I post a link? I pulled it up here. Let me post a link for the study from the Southern Poverty Law Center. Okay, yeah, I just posted it. All right, let's continue. Let's go back to the original article from the from AtlantaBlackStar.com, AtlantaBlackStar.com. I have all these articles here, so you just have to bear with me, because I did a lot of research to prepare for this presentation. Okay, research by a female professor reveals startling truth that white women made up 40% of slave owners. Okay, so that was the original article we started talking about. How you all like this type of information? Okay, and I'll post a link again here for the online course we have starting up Wednesday, June 12th. Wednesday, June 12th, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. That'll be an 8-week, 16-hour online course. If you miss any of the sessions, it'll be all recorded. Go back and watch it over and over again. but I'm doing it live, first time in basically 2 years I've done this online course live. All right, so let's go back to this article. Okay, so Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers, who's an African-American female professor, demonstrates that in her book, name of the book is They Were Her Property, White Women as Slave Owners. In her book, by including interviews with formerly enslaved people conducted in the 1930s through the New Deal Agency Works Progress Administration. One formerly enslaved woman said children would ruthlessly beat enslaved people. Okay, it didn't matter whether the child was large or small, they always beat you till the blood ran down, she said. Now, once they came of age, white women also reportedly got involved in the slave market. Aside from beating slaves, once they owned them, white women bought, sold, and sought out their return. Okay, so runaway slaves, they would have slave catchers. This was a whole profession to be a slave catcher. They would take out newspaper ads for runaway slaves, wanted runaway slaves, give a description of them, and they will pay a bounty. All right. Now, the notion flips the previous belief of scholars that white women abstained from engaging in such activity as it was deemed improper. As the women got pregnant and had their own families, as white women got pregnant and had their own families, they reportedly orchestrated sexual assaults between enslaved people so that enslaved black women could be available to nurse white women's children. Okay, so this is like breeding, okay, between an enslaved African man and an enslaved African woman. This, in addition to tearing enslaved women's babies away from them so they could nurse white women's children and avoid becoming, as Professor Jones Rogers stated, one white woman slave owner said, quote, a slave, end quote, to her children. One white woman described it as being a slave to her child. Advertisements for wet nurses, because they were called wet nurses. Advertisements for wet nurses. Hold on, let's jump around. So advertisements for wet nurses were taken out throughout newspapers. They were plastered throughout newspapers, reportedly creating a massive market for enslaved black women who recently delivered children. So this is something that's not talked about a lot. Now, there was a article from face-to-faceafrica.com, face-to-faceafrica.com, the word face, the number 2, faceafrica.com. This is from August 20th, 2018. You may have seen me post it before. It's called The Disturbing History of Enslaved Mothers Forced to Breastfeed White Babies in the 1600s. The Disturbing History of Enslaved Mothers Forced to Breastfeed White Babies in the 1600s. And so you know, you would ask the question, wait a second. If white people think that African people were inferior, and this is why they enslaved them, why would a white mother want an African-American mother to breastfeed her child? Is because they deem the breast milk of an African-American woman to be healthier for a child than the breast milk of a white woman. 1. 2, it was looked at as being something that was, it was looked at as being, when you had slave owners, they were looked at as a dominant economic class, the genteel life. So it was also looked at something that was as a laborious or something that was looked at as being beneath them, something to that extent, okay? So it was a combination of things, but the breast milk of African-American women was looked at as being healthier, and it would cause the child to grow up to be big and strong, okay? It would cause the child to be a healthier child. And you had some white women who looked at it as being a chore also, okay? Breastfeeding their baby routinely a number of times a day, they looked at that as being a chore. So if you have enslaved Africans to do all this other work that you don't want to do, well, you can have enslaved Africans to breastfeed your child also. So this is real history. Okay, this is all dealing with the history of slavery. Okay, this is real history. So check out this article from face-to-faceafrica.com, The Disturbing History of Enslaved Mothers Forced to Breastfeed White Babies in the 1600s. And recently, in the past few years, I have seen ads here in Detroit. I don't know if they had them across, I think they had them across the country, but I've seen ads here in Detroit on TV stations in Detroit talking about the health benefits of breastfeeding, but they were targeting African-American women. And what happened is that because of this, because of many African-American women being forced to be wet nurses, rented out as wet nurses during slavery, a stigma was attached to breastfeeding for African-American women. And this is something passed down generation after generation, but there's some type of stigma associated with breastfeeding. Now, also what happened and I'm not blaming anybody, but as more African-American women became professionals, got college degrees, became professionals, went out into the workforce, somehow breastfeeding became associated with something that poorer women did. So as they get degrees and as Similac and as formula is being pushed on them and marketed to them, right? Some African-American women started using formula, which is not nearly as healthy as breast milk, okay? But I'm not blaming African-American women, but this is all tied into the marketing and tied into a stigma. Breastfeeding became associated with something that poor women did, okay? And I think there's probably some type of stigma, still a residue existed handed down from slavery when African-American women were forced to be wet nurses also. So you had to have a marketing campaign, public service announcements, but a marketing campaign to reposition breastfeeding in the minds of many African-American women and talk about the benefits of it. It helps your child be healthier. It helps to immunize your child. It helps you drop pounds. It helps boost your metabolism, the mother. It helps you drop pounds drop the baby weight faster. There were a number of ads that were taken out. They were on radio and television to promote the health benefits of African-American women breastfeeding children. Okay, that also helps to reduce like infant mortality, things like this, right? So it's a lot there. Okay, so we're still. I talk about how we're all going through a 12-step process, recovering from the side effects of white supremacy and racism. Right, we're all going through this. We're all going through a 12-step process, and because after slavery ends, we never got psychological help. Okay, and if you read Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGroot, I have the book somewhere here in one of these 4 stacks of books. If you read Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGroot, she talks about how when you have to learn to adapt to a hostile environment to survive, then so she's talking about slavery in this country. Then after slavery ends, if you've never been taught to unlearn those behaviors, then you'll still exhibit a lot of those behaviors and pass them down generation after generation. Okay. And I would argue that the environment was still hostile after slavery ended. It was just in a different way. Okay. All right. So, and we know that mother's milk is for children, not cow's milk. Right? Mother's milk is for children, not cow's milk. Cow's milk is for baby calves. Cow's milk is not for humans. The whole, see, my background's in marketing, so the whole push to get humans to drink cow's milk largely comes from the American Dairy Association. which through marketing campaigns promoted this. So like when we were growing up, we had the 4 basic food groups. Okay. You have meats, grains, vegetables, and dairy products. And like in school, you know, they have that poster. They would have the poster on the wall of the 4 basic food groups. You need this number of servings a day from this group, that group, that group, right? Well, if you look at on the poster, who put that out? That was from the American Dairy Association. The American Dairy Association basically created the 4 basic food groups to sell more dairy products. And I remember seeing that in my marketing books when I was in college, taking marketing classes. I remember seeing that in the marketing books. So that's a whole marketing campaign to get people to drink cow's milk and to use dairy products from cows, made from cow's milk, that's not designed for humans. But that's all in the marketing. Marketing is dealing with crafting messages, you know, and you know, power's the ability to define and shape reality and have other people accept your definition of reality as if it were their own. This deals still with crafting messages and getting people to elicit a certain behavior that you want them to exhibit, that you want them to buy into. So now they have, I think it's like 9 food groups now. Okay, they realize the 4 is not adequate enough health-wise. So now they've expanded it. I think it's like 9 food groups. Okay, all right. So let's continue here. All right. So as the women got pregnant and had their own as the white women got pregnant and had their own families, they reportedly orchestrated sexual assaults between enslaved people so that enslaved black women could be available to nurse white women's children. This, in addition to tearing enslaved women's babies away from them so they could nurse white women's children and avoid becoming, as Professor Jones Rogers stated, one white woman slave owner said, quote, a slave, end quote, to her children. Advertisements for wet nurses were plastered throughout newspapers, reportedly creating a massive market for enslaved black women who recently delivered children. Professor Jones Rogers said, quote, there were instances in which formerly enslaved people did in fact say that their mistresses either sanctioned acts of sexual violence against them that were perpetrated at the hands of white men, or that they orchestrated instances of sexual violence between 2 enslaved people, one male, one woman, that they owned in hopes of producing children from those acts of sexual violence. So she's talking about how this was timed with the white woman becoming pregnant so that the African-American female slave would give birth around the time white woman gave birth, or would be lactating around the time that the white woman's child is born, so she could be a wet nurse so the slave woman could be a wet nurse to the white woman's child. All right. In the article from the New York Times, he talked about this also, if I remember correctly. Yeah, page 2 from the New York Times article. Previously invisible sectors of the market are illuminated, many created and controlled by white women. Historians long asserted, for instance, that Southern women use wet nurses only, quote, as a last resort, end quote. But the testimonies of formerly enslaved people and advertisements from the 18th and 19th centuries tell a different story. The practice appears to have been widespread. Now, the article from face-to-faceafrica.com, that talks about the 1600s. We're talking about the 18th and 19th century. We're talking about the 1700s and the 1800s. One woman recalled that her enslaved mother always gave birth at the same time as her mistress, so she would be able to, one woman recalled that her enslaved mother always gave birth at the same time as her mistress, so she would be available to nurse the white baby. Quote, these recollections make it clear that enslaved women were giving birth on a routine basis. But what often remains unexplored is what led to these constant conceptions. So we're, quote, undoubtedly the result of sexual assault. So what is happening here, and I've talked about this before, and we still see it today, is that the sexuality of African women was used as a commodity, and it was controlled by white people. So you have orchestrated breeding taking place of African women, okay, to benefit white women who are slave owners. There was an old stereotype of African American women, even after slavery ended, that you can't rape a black woman. It goes back to this treatment during slavery of forced breeding, right? And how the conception happened, whether it's with a white man or an African slave. And African women being used as wet nurses. So when we have, for instance, and I'm going to go here with this, when we have, for instance, R. Kelly, and we look at the documentary Surviving R. Kelly, the multi-part series, I watched that on Lifetime. And I watched part of the follow-up that took place in May called the follow-up to it, to deal with the impact of Surviving R. Kelly. One of the recurring themes in Surviving R. Kelly was he was able to get away with what he was doing because no one cares when black women are being sexually assaulted. If you go through and watch it, okay, and I watched it twice, okay, the 6-part series, that's one of the recurring themes. No one cares when black women are being sexually assaulted. Well, there's a history to this going back to slavery. But if we don't really understand that history and put it to a proper context, then when we have the hypersexualization of African American women today in negative corporate controlled hip hop, and we still see a lot of those images, and we see the men in the movie, we see the men in the videos fully clothed and the black women half naked, right? And her sexuality or her hypersexualization or the accentuation of certain body parts gives her worth. Okay, we see this still being perpetuated today. Okay, so let's continue here. Okay, so white women were also said to have gone through great lengths to maintain ownership of their slaves as the Civil War waged on. Now, History.com, the official website of the History Channel, in their article dealing with this, they're cited in the article from AtlantaBlackStar.com. I read the article from History.com also, the massive overlooked role of female slave owners, okay, the massive overlooked role of female slave owners. History.com reports that one woman named Martha Gibbs, Gibbs, forced enslaved Africans to Texas and threatened them with a gun to continue working for her through 1866, the year after slavery was officially abolished. So, you know, people are going to celebrate Juneteenth, right? And we're told this is when the enslaved Africans in Galveston, Texas got the word that they were free, okay? But even though I guess most of the slaves in Texas were free, all of them weren't free. Because Martha Gibbs was still working her enslaved Africans at gunpoint, at least part of the time, through 1866, okay? So even after the institution was outlawed, institution of slavery was outlawed, Southern white women reportedly doled out work contracts that exploited Black people to work under slave conditions. Some described it as a benign industry, as Margaret Mitchell did in the novel Gone with the Wind, that was turned into a movie about 1938, 39. And then we know that Hattie McDaniels wins an Oscar for Best Supporting Actress in 1939 for playing a slave. She played Mammy, I think her name was Mammy, in Gone with the Wind. The same idea has carried out through to textbooks discussing enslavement today. As recently as April 2018, it was exposed that students in Texas had been using a textbook that stated that not all enslaved Africans were unhappy. So they're trying to promote this myth of the happy slave. And this was part of that whole lost cause propaganda campaign for 150 years. The movie The Birth of a Nation was part of that as well. Debuted February 8th, 1915. And the movie The Birth of a Nation rejuvenated the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan had largely died out by about 1915. The Klan had largely died out. And the 1915 was the 50th year anniversary of the Civil War ending in 1865, and the 13th Amendment of 1865 was legally freed the enslaved Africans. But also it's the 50th year anniversary of the Ku Klux Klan being founded December 24th, 1865 in Pulaski, Tennessee. So the movie shows the Klan as being the heroes of the movie. And the movie takes place during slavery, the Civil War, and Reconstruction. And it takes place in Piedmont, South Carolina. And the doctor, the slave owner, is a doctor. And they showed the slaves on the plantation being happy and singing and dancing for the entertainment of the slave owners. And it basically shows the slaves as being like almost part of the family. Okay. Then the Civil War comes through and ravages South Carolina, ravages the South, totally destroys these white people's way of life. And the argument that the South was making during slavery and even after slavery was that the institution of slavery was a good institution for everybody involved. The kindly slave master looked out for his slaves, and they were almost like a part of the family, and he provided protection and provided food and clothing and shelter for the slaves, and the slaves in turn produced crops that the master could sell. And they talked about a checks and balance system, how slavery kept everything in check. And you had the South also arguing before slavery ended and after slavery ended, arguing that the enslaved Africans were too ignorant to be able to take care of themselves, and that the institution of slavery, and that slaves were better off under the institution of slavery because they were under the protection of the slave master, and he would provide for them. These are the arguments that they were making before and after slavery ended, the South. All right. So, and you see this, the original movie, The Birth of a Nation, is on YouTube. Okay. And you see this pretty much played out in that movie as well. It's a 3-hour movie. It's a silent movie, but you can watch it. And then you have to understand like the history behind the movie. But this is 50 years after the Civil War ends. This is the 1915. So that's the second year of World War I. World War I is 1914 to 1918. And this movie caused race riots in the streets also. President Woodrow Wilson had a private screening of a movie at the White House. It was directed by D.W. Griffith. Okay. The movie, The Birth of a Nation, is based upon a novel by a man named Thomas Dixon. The name of the novel is called The Klansman. Okay. About the Ku Klux Klan, The Klansman. And about the first month that the movie is out, the movie is actually called The Klansman, but then they're going to change the name of the movie to The Birth of a Nation. Now, so we go back to the article from AtlantaBlackStar.com. Even after the institution of slavery was outlawed, Southern white women reportedly doled out contracts that exploited Black people to work under slave-like conditions. Okay. Still, Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers argues in her book that white women's, quote, ideological and sentimental connections, end quote, to slavery were not the only thing that made them defend the practice of slavery. She remarked that women who were around during enslavement would have done the same thing. Okay. All right. And once again, when we study this history, she's not talking about all white women. I'm not talking about all white women. I'm talking about all white people. We know all white people did not own slaves. We're talking about the ones who did. Okay. So check out this article from AtlantaBlackStar.com. Research by Black female professor reveals startling truth that white women made up 40% of slave owners. This is written by Kirsten Willis, May 25th, 2019 for AtlantaBlackStar.com. So we'll post this link here. And then I'm going to go to the one from the New York Times and also History.com very quickly here to make sure I didn't forget anything, because I made notes in the margins of these articles. So just give me a second here and look at my notes. Juneteenth gone with the wind. Okay, we got all that. All right, because I do preparation for these broadcasts also. How's everybody doing? How you like this type of information? Share this broadcast on your Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in also. If you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, paypal.me/the-AHNShow, paypal.me/the-AHNShow. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, broadcast our normal Sunday night show on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF. On the radio, we broadcast on Facebook Live also. It also helps when I have to travel to different events and pay my way there. It helps cover the cost. So travel helps go towards that as well. Okay, so paypal.me/the-AHNShow or at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Click on the yellow donate button because this will help pay to travel to Atlanta for the Juneteenth Festival. Then also we have and I'll do a brief overview of, a brief preview of the new online course I have starting up Wednesday, June 12th. It's called Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, What They Didn't Teach You in School. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, What They Didn't Teach You in School. This is a 8-week, 16-hour online course. We'll deal with thousands of years of history. We'll deal with history leading up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place, get a better understanding of that. We'll understand ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet, the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, which is extremely important to understand. We'll deal with Christopher Columbus, who helped to lay the foundation for slavery, racism, capitalism, the exploitation of indigenous people. And we'll deal with what leads to the transatlantic slave trade happening also. Okay, so just a second here. Let me look at my notes. Okay, so when we look at the article from history.com, it talks about how in her book, They Were Her Property, upends a lot of older scholarship. For example, previous scholars had argued that most Southern white women did not buy, sell, or inflict violence on enslaved people because this was considered improper for white women. But Professor Stephanie E. Jones Rogers argues that white women were actually trained to participate from a very young age. She said, quote, their exposure to the slave market is not something that begins in adulthood. It begins in their homes when they're little girls, sometimes infants, when they're given enslaved people as gifts, okay? And she cited interviews with formerly enslaved people, as I said before. She cited interviews with formerly enslaved people conducted by the Works Progress Administration, right? And those interviews with formerly enslaved Africans shows the part of white children's training in plantation management involved beating enslaved people, okay? And then when it talks about for wet nurses, to this end, white women placed thousands of advertisements in newspapers looking for enslaved wet nurses to feed their own children, and created a huge market for enslaved Black women who had recently given birth. Okay, so this is still the marketing and the control and marketing of African women's bodies. Okay. All right, so they talk about going with the wind as well. Okay, so check out this article from history.com. The massive overlooked role of female slave owners. Okay, that's by Becky Little, March 12, 2019, history.com. And then I want to look at the article from New York Times because I made notes. Okay, so what's interesting here, they talk about some other books, some recent other books that have come out over the past few years dealing with the history of slavery. They mention The Half Has Never Been Told by Edward Baptist. And I've read excerpts of it. It looks like a really good book. I've seen interviews he's done. I know Roland Martin interviewed him also. But this is the article from New York Times. White Women Were Avid Slave Owners, a New Book Shows. And on page 3 of the article, it says, in horrifying, meticulous detail, the book illustrates, referring to, I think they're referring to Edward Baptist's book. The book illustrates the centrality of violence to capitalism. Baptist argued the same point. They're talking about Professor Stephanie Jones Rogers' book, and they're comparing it to Edward Baptist's book. That's what it is. Baptist argued the same point in The Half Has Never Been Told. It was sheer brutality that dramatically increased the cotton yield between 1800 and 1860, he wrote, okay? And this is after the cotton gin is invented in basically 1793, and then you're going to have copies of the cotton gin also, okay? And let me go to, let me bring the article up here on the computer. That's on page 3. Just a second here. All right, so it was sheer brutality that dramatically increased the cotton yield between 1800 and 1860, Edward Baptist wrote. No new technology or innovation surfaced in those years, but constant beatings, sexual abuse, and waterboarding had become common practices. In that era, quote, white people inflicted torture far more often than in almost any human society that ever existed, end quote. Okay, this is not, Edward Baptist is a white historian, and he's writing this. This is in the book, The Half Has Never Been Told. And if you go on YouTube, you can watch the interview that Roland Martin did with him on News One Now. Okay, yeah, News One Now, that used to be on TV One. Now, okay, let's see. But now, so during this time, 1800 to 1860, so the cotton gin is invented in 1793. 1803, you had the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, signed by President Thomas Jefferson. The U.S. gets about 828,000 square miles of land for less than 3 cents an acre. They're going to carve out about 15 new states out of this land. And they try to keep a balance between free states and new states. Now this gives, so what happens is, because of the Louisiana Purchase, and I just did a video dealing with how the Louisiana Purchase helped increase the demand for slaves. So watch that also on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, or our Facebook fan page, The African History Network. Click on videos. Because of Louisiana Purchase happens because of the Haitian Revolution and Toussaint Louverture and Bookman Dada, Dessalines, you know, they're beating the hell out of the French. It causes the French to sell their land here because France is about to go bankrupt. It causes them to sell their land here that they own, that they stole from Native Americans and African people who were already here for tens of thousands of years, by the way. France is trying to raise money, okay? So they sell all this land to the U.S., and it doubles the territory of the U.S. at the time. But it increases the need for slave labor as well, because you have all this fertile land and you want to grow crops. So increases the need for slave breeding, etc. Okay. And also it increases the need for Africans to be imported here as well as slaves. Okay. So not just slave breeding, but also increases the need for Africans to be imported here. Excuse me. Okay. So then in January 1st, 1808, we know that the law is passed that bans the transatlantic slave trade. That's passed by Congress March 2nd, 1807, based upon Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution. This is why people need to read the U.S. Constitution. It stipulated that the importation of Africans as slaves would be outlawed at the earliest in 1808. So that law passes Congress March 2nd, 1807. It goes into effect January 1st, 1808, because that's the earliest it could go into effect based upon the U.S. Constitution. The framers of the Constitution, because they were debating at the Philadelphia Convention in 1787 whether to abolish slavery or not, they decided to put in a 20-year clause to allow those who wanted slavery to continue to bring in Africans to continue to make profits, and they were outlawed at the earliest in 1808. This is stipulated in Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution. It's actually in the first, basically like the first paragraph or first two paragraphs. So that goes into effect January 1st, 1808. It outlaws Africans coming to this country as slaves, but it still allows slavery to exist in this country. Slave plantations, the auction blocks, the trading, all this stuff, the breeding. And what this does is this increases the need for slave breeding. Okay, now Europeans are still going to bring Africans into this country as slaves, but they're violating federal law when they do it. Okay, and we see this with the Clotilda of 1860 that comes into Alabama. With the slave owner, the slave owner was from Alabama. He lived in Alabama, and the Clotilda comes into Alabama in June or July of 1860, and it's illegal. It's illegal. This is human trafficking, but Europeans kept doing this after January 1st, 1808. Okay, so there's I interviewed Dr. Jahi Issa and Brother Reggie Marbury dealing with this history. And some of that history I already knew, but they went even deeper into it. They wrote an article in 2017 called Reparations is Dead. And scholars have ideas on how to revive it. I'll get to the exact name of the article here. But it deals with this history of how Europeans in this country continue to violate federal law by bringing Africans in this country as slaves, even though it was illegal. Okay, and it deals with how it was done to a much greater extent than originally we thought. Reparations is Dead, How to Resurrect It. That's the name of the article. Reparations is Dead, How to Resurrect It. Okay. With Dr. Jahi Issa and Brother Reggie Marbury. So read this article also. I did a 2-part interview with them that's archived in audio podcast format. So just go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, click on listen to podcasts, okay? Or wherever you get your podcast from, just search for the African History Network show, because we're on 8 different podcast platforms. And it should be there. All right. Okay, so let's continue here. So I think I got all of my notes. How you all like this type of information?
25 years, the Black History 101 Mobile Museum has carried on the legacy of museum movement in America by showcasing artifacts of the Black experience at colleges, universities, K-12 corporations, libraries, conferences, and cultural events. making it the most traversed Black History exhibit in history. Dr. Khalid Kim is the founder of the Black History 101 Museum, and he is a highly sought-after public speaker on topics of Black history, social studies, education, museum studies, health, and race relations. Dr. Khalid named change makers for NB Universal's Erase the Hate campaign and listed as the 100 Men of Distinction for Black Enterprise. He recently founded Michigan Hip Hop Archive on the campus of Western Michigan University. The Black History 101 Museum is currently scheduling in and virtual exhibits nationwide. For more, please contact Dr. Khalid Al-Hakim, 1-3-645-4197, 3-645-197, or visit their website, blackhistorymuseum.com. That's mobilemuseum.com. You can also email him at history101@yahoo.com, b101@yahoo.com. Are you ready for economy? Well, the role of economics in the development of civilization is a brand documentary that will set a new path of knowledge and enlightenment. The film gives viewers a snapshot of our economic history from the dawn of civilization right up until today. The main theme of the film is the interrelationship between the three components of economics, politics, and culture. Hapi brings together and most prominent in the field of psychology, history, business, and politics as Dr. Leonard Priest, Professor James Small, Dr. William Malveaux, Dr. Zahi Hawaii, and Jabari Osazi, and more. Together, they deliver a message of cooperative economics, financial independence, and a pride that we can all be inspired by. The film is on all digital formats. Or for D, please visit HAPIPfilm.com. Use offer code HAPI for a 10% discount. Have you tasted the world famous No Frowny Brownie from the Pink Bakery? If not, what are you for? They are vegan, gluten-free, and free of the big 8 allergens. While eating their No Frowny brownies, the fabulous Miss Tabitha Brown said they were very good. Very good. You know, if she says that, they are. Pink Bakery is the first Black-owned big 8 allergen-free baking mix company. Go to thepinkbakery.com, thepinkbakery.com to order No Frowny Brownie Mix today. Sage and Elm Apothecary creates unique products, especially with you in mind. They use simple ingredients such as whole fruits, herbs, and vegetables. Each product crafted offers a unique plant-based experience. Their holistic approach to self-care formulate their product anyway. They're proud to serve our community of plant-based product support and offerings for the entire family. Sage and Elm Apothecary designs over 60 different beautifully handcrafted soaps, natural toothpaste, hydrating oils, deodorant, face masks, shampoos, conditioners, and so much more. Visit their website at sageandelmapothecary.com. That's sageandelmapothecary.com, APOTHECARY, and find out about their upcoming events throughout the year. Allow Sage and Apothecary to provide for all of your plant-based needs. Use promo code AHNWinter20, AHNWinter20 for a special discount. Gain knowledge in minutes with Blacklist Ed. Blacklist Ed is an app that provides insightful summaries of books pertaining to the Black experience. As Black people, we see the importance of reading books to discover our inevitable contributions to world history, to lift our self-esteem, to empower ourselves for a relentless fight for social justice. Unfortunately, with our busy lives, it feels like there's never enough time to read. Fortunately, there's a solution. With List Ed, app provides key insights from best-selling books about experience, therefore saving time, increasing your knowledge, and empowering yourself through inspirational and actionable ideas. You can read or listen on the go. Start your free trial today by going to blacklisted.com. That's black without the C, BLAK. Or you can download the Blacklist Ed app from the App Store or Google Play. Blacklist Ed, empower you.